For decades, everyone thought they knew the golden rule for the Malaysian ringgit. When oil prices went up, the currency got stronger. It was simple, it was predictable, until, well, it wasn't. So today, we're going to unpack what happens when an entire country's economic playbook gets completely thrown out the window.
So, really, what does happen when a rule that's worked for ages just stops working? We're about to find out because the story of the Ringgit, it actually reveals some incredibly powerful new forces that are reshaping economies all over the world.
Okay, so before we get into what broke, we really need to get a handle on the rule itself. For the longest time, there was this one core belief about Malaysia's currency.
Yeah, the ringgit was what you'd call a classic commodity currency. And since Malaysia is a huge oil exporter, the whole logic was super simple. The country's economic fate and the value of its currency was tied directly to the global price of crude oil.
And look, the logic was just beautiful in its simplicity. I mean, everyone from top economists to everyday investors lived by this. Oil prices go up, revenue from Malaysia's national oil company, Petronas, would surge. And that economic boom was supposed to feed right into a stronger ringgit. Super predictable, totally reliable, and for years, it worked like a charm.
All right, and then 2022 happened. And let me tell you, the golden rule didn't just bend, it absolutely shattered, leaving pretty much everyone scratching their heads.
So in 2022, thanks to everything going on in the world, like the war in Ukraine, the price of Brent crude oil just went through the roof. We're talking an average of over $100 a barrel for the year. Now, if you're following the old logic, you'd be thinking, okay, the Malaysian ringgit is about to have a great year.
But, yeah, that's not what happened. Not even close. Instead of soaring, the ringgit actually weakened, hitting an average of 4.40 against the US dollar. This was the total opposite of what the old rule predicted.
So here's the big puzzle we're trying to solve. You have decades of history saying the ringgit should be super strong, but the reality? The exact opposite. So what in the world was going on? What was powerful enough to completely cancel out a massive windfall from record-high oil prices?
Well, the answer, as it turns out, wasn't hiding in the oil fields. Nope, it was in the world of global finance. A new, much more powerful player had entered the game, and it was basically acting like a giant money magnet, pulling cash all the way from Malaysia to the United States. And this whole thing has a name: the interest rate differential.
Okay, so here's the play-by-play. To fight its own inflation, the U.S. Federal Reserve started jacking up its interest rates, and I mean aggressively. They pushed them all the way up to about 5.5%. Now, meanwhile, Malaysia's central bank kept its rate much lower, right around 3%. So put yourself in the shoes of a global investor. Where are you going to park your money? The place earning 3% or the one earning 5.5%? It's a no-brainer, right? Money just poured out of Malaysia and flooded into the U.S. And to do that, investors had to sell their ringgit to buy U.S. dollars. All that selling pressure is what hammered the ringgit's value down, totally wiping out any benefit from those high oil prices.
It really is that simple. At the end of the day, big money is always going to chase the highest return. It wasn't that Malaysia's economy was suddenly weak or anything. It was just that the US was offering a way better deal, and capital always follows the yield.
Okay, so you'd think mystery solved, right? But just when we think we've got it all figured out, the story takes another really interesting twist. Because what happened next proved that the ringgit's fate was no longer tied to just one or two things happening outside its borders.
So let's fast forward to 2024 and 2025, and this is where things get even crazier. Oil prices, they dropped a lot, down into that $60, $70 range. Now, the old rule book would say that should have been terrible news for the ringgit, but you guessed it, the exact opposite happened. The ringgit actually got stronger. So what on earth was driving it now?
This time, the answer wasn't in global oil markets, and it wasn't even about what the U.S. was doing with interest rates. The new engine for the ringgit's strength was found right at home, inside Malaysia itself.
So, what did they do? Well, Malaysia really started to focus on its own fundamentals. The government brought in a new Fiscal Responsibility Act to get a handle on its debt. Then there was this big, coordinated push to get government-linked companies to bring their foreign profits back home, which, of course, creates a natural demand for the ringgit. And all this was happening while the country's national reserve stayed solid and its own domestic economy was just humming along with GDP growth topping 5%.
And this table, right here, is where you can really see this decoupling in action. Just look at 2024 and 2025. Brent crude prices are heading down, but GDP growth is strong. And look at the exchange rate. It's improving. The ringgit is getting stronger. It was like the currency had got its old ties to oil and was now running on the power of its own internal economic health.
And that really brings us to the main takeaway of this whole story. That old, simple rule, it's gone. The new reality, the new rule for the Malaysian ringgit is that its value is now driven by a mix of two big things. Global interest rate policies, for sure, but also, and this is the crucial part, the strength of its own domestic economy and how well it manages its finances.
You know, the story of the ringgit is such a powerful reminder that in today's super-connected global economy, the old playbooks just don't always cut it anymore. Capital moves faster than ever, and what a country does at home is becoming more and more important. And that really leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Which country's long-held economic truths are going to be the next ones to get a complete rewrite?